I was moments away from leaving my old life behind when a stranger shoved a briefcase into my arms and told me that if I opened it, my future would be erased. Now I'm being hunted by a shadow network determined to pin a massive, life-ruining accusation on me, and the only way out is to survive until sunrise. The boxes were stacked floor to ceiling in my studio apartment, a cardboard barricade against my former life. For 5 years, I had lived in this city, chasing a ghost of a career that never materialized, surrounded by people who viewed friendship as a transaction. Tomorrow, I was getting on a train to a quiet coastal town where no one knew my name, where the only noise would be the rhythmic crashing of the tide against the pier. I had a job lined up at a boat repair shop, a small rental waiting, and a future that felt clean, like a blank page. I grabbed my final trash bag, the last remnants of a life I was desperate to shed, and headed down the narrow, dimly lit hallway toward the disposal area. The building was old, the kind of place where the floorboards groaned under your weight, whispering stories of everyone who had come and gone. I was humming a soft melody, lost in the anticipation of the next morning, when the elevator chime echoed through the floor. It was late, past midnight, and the service elevator wasn't supposed to be working. When the rusted metal doors parted, I didn't see the usual maintenance worker. I saw a man, breathless and pale, clutching a heavy leather briefcase to his chest, as if it contained his own heartbeat. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic animal terror that stopped me dead in my tracks. He wasn't just nervous. He looked like a man who had seen the edge of the world and was currently falling off it. Before I could even mutter a polite apology for standing in his way, he shoved the briefcase into my arms. It was shockingly heavy, dragging my shoulder down with the weight of something leaden and absolute. "Please," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Don't open it. Don't look inside. Just take it to the basement locker, number 402. Use this." He pressed a small, cold key into my palm, his fingers trembling violently. "If anyone asks, you've never seen me. If you want to keep breathing, keep walking." Before I could process the absurdity of the request, he turned and sprinted toward the emergency exit, his boots clattering against the concrete stairs. He vanished into the stairwell, leaving the heavy silence of the floor behind him. I stood there, rooted to the spot, holding a briefcase that felt like it was humming with a low-frequency vibration. My rational mind screamed at me to drop it, to run to my apartment and lock the door, to pretend that the last 30 seconds had been a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But then, the muffled sound of voices drifted from the elevator. It wasn't the sound of neighbors coming home late. It was the rhythmic, synchronized sound of heavy footsteps. 3 men stepped out of the elevator. They weren't dressed like tenants. They wore suits that cost more than my entire move, tailored to perfection, and they moved with the eerie, calculated grace of a group working in perfect, lethal unison. The man in the center held up a hand, and the others stopped instantly. His eyes scanned the hallway, passing over the empty elevator, then the closed doors, and finally, they landed on me. "Good evening," the lead man said, his voice smooth, devoid of any genuine warmth. He tipped his head slightly, his gaze dropping to the briefcase I was clutching against my chest. "You seem to be holding something that doesn't belong to you. We've been looking for that specific item all evening. It's a very dangerous thing to be involved with, friend, especially when you're about to start a new chapter in your life." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. How did he know about the move? I hadn't told a soul. I took a half step back, my grip tightening on the handle of the case. The man took a step forward, his smile not reaching his eyes, which remained cold, calculating instruments of observation. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling out a piece of illegal equipment. Instead, he pulled out a photograph. He held it up, and my blood turned to ice. It was a picture of me, taken only 3 hours ago, walking out of a coffee shop near the train station. "We have a lot of questions," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "And you have a choice. You can hand over the property, and we can discuss how this entire situation remains a mere misunderstanding. Or you can force us to treat you like an accessory to a much larger, darker narrative." I don't think you want to be associated with the heavy accusations we're currently investigating. Possession of these contents carries a penalty that effectively ends any future you think you have." The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. I realized then that the briefcase wasn't just an object, it was a trap. By simply touching it, I had stepped into a path that led away from my quiet coastal life and into a shadow world I didn't understand. I looked at the exit door, then at the man. I knew if I handed it over, I might be killed for being a witness. If I kept it, I was hunted by people who clearly had the power to make me disappear without a trace. I made a choice, fueled by pure, desperate instinct. I bolted. I threw the trash bag at the lead man's face, spun around, and sprinted back toward my apartment, my keys jingling frantically in my pocket. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, just as a heavy, deliberate thud hit the wood, followed by a voice that promised I wouldn't make it to sunrise. I backed away, staring at the locked door, when suddenly my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from an unknown number. "Do not trust the man at the door. He isn't with the authorities. Look in the side pocket of the bag. Now." My hands shaking, I reached for the latch of the briefcase. My fingers hovered over the brass locks of the briefcase. The metallic click, as the latches sprang open, felt like a gunshot in the silent room. I held my breath, terrified of what I might find. Drugs, perhaps, or evidence of some deep, state-level corruption. But as the lid lifted, there were no illegal packages or incriminating documents. Instead, the interior was packed with high-end, compact encryption hardware and a single glowing tablet screen that flickered to life the moment the light hit its sensors. On the screen was a live feed. It was a bird's-eye view of my own hallway, but the angle was impossible. It looked like it was coming from a camera hidden inside the very wall opposite my door. I saw the three men standing there, perfectly still. They weren't knocking anymore. They were waiting. The lead man was speaking into a lapel mic, his face contorted into a look of cold, calculating annoyance. I watched, horrified, as he pulled out a small metallic device and pressed it against my doorframe. A soft blue light pulsed, and I felt the vibrations of an electronic lock being systematically bypassed. They have a master key, I realized, my blood running cold. Or they don't even need one. I looked back at the tablet. A new message scrolled across the bottom of the feed. "They are testing the frequency of your deadbolt. You have 90 seconds before they walk through that door. Check the bottom compartment." I scrambled, flipping the hardware trays aside. Beneath a lining of velvet and lead shielding, I found a burner phone and a handwritten note. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared as if by sweat or rain. "If you are reading this, you are the only one left who can prove they aren't who they say they are. They aren't internal security. They are a splinter group trying to frame the department for a disappearance. If they catch you, they won't just kill you. They'll frame you for the contents of this case. You'll spend dozens of years behind bars for a life you never lived." The weight of the accusation hit me with physical force. This wasn't just a mugging or a random crime. I had been handed a lightning rod, and I was standing in the middle of a thunderstorm. The apartment suddenly felt like a tomb. I grabbed my go-bag, the one packed for my new life, and shoved the tablet and the burner phone inside. I moved toward the fire escape window, but as I touched the latch, the lights in my apartment flickered and died. The hallway light outside went black, plunging the entire floor into an oppressive, velvet darkness. The heavy silence of the building was broken by the quiet, rhythmic sound of the electronic lock resetting. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure they could hear it through the door. I scrambled to the window, throwing it open just as the front door handle began to turn. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of rain and asphalt, a sharp contrast to the stale metallic scent of the encroaching men. I stepped onto the rusted metal landing of the fire escape, my breath hitching in my chest. Below me, the alleyway was dark, save for the flickering amber glow of a distant street lamp. Just as I prepared to descend, a beam of light cut through the dark from the floor above. A flashlight. They were covering the exits. I froze, crouching against the brick wall of the building, my heart screaming at me to run, but my muscles paralyzed by the sheer proximity of my pursuers. Then, the door to the apartment behind me kicked open. It didn't just open. It splintered off its hinges, flying across the room with a violence that made me flinch. Heavy boots crunched on the glass of my broken window. "We know you're out here," the voice from the hallway echoed, colder now, stripped of all pretense. "The building is surrounded. The perimeter is set. There is no version of this night where you walk away free. Give us the hardware, and we ensure your record stays clean. Keep it, and we ensure you cease to exist." I didn't wait for them to see me. I leaped onto the ladder, the metal groaning under my weight as I slid down, my hands burning against the frozen iron. I hit the concrete of the alleyway hard, stumbling, but forcing myself to find my footing. I began to sprint, not toward the street, but toward the maze of dumpsters and narrow passages behind the warehouses. I had to reach the subway, my only hope for disappearing into the city's veins. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead. Blocking the end of the alley was a black sedan, its engine idling with a low, predatory hum. The headlights surged on, blinding me, pinning me against the wall like a moth on a display board. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. She wasn't one of the men. She was dressed in civilian clothes, a dark coat pulled tight against the chill. She held a hand up, motioning for me to stay put. "You're running the wrong way," she said, her voice urgent, cutting through the roar of the idling engine. "If you cross that street, you're dead. Get in the car." I looked back at the apartment building. Shadows were moving down the fire escape. I looked at the woman. Her face was stern, but there was no malice in her eyes, only a strange, frantic empathy. I heard a muffled sound from the alley, the distinct mechanical click of an object being prepared for use. They were close. I had seconds to decide, trust the stranger, or take my chances in the dark against people who knew my name, my plans, and my darkest fears. I took a step toward the car, but as I reached for the door handle, she suddenly pulled a weapon from her waistband and aimed it not at me, but at the shadows behind me. "Duck!" she screamed. A flash illuminated the alley, followed by the deafening roar of a shot that shattered the silence of the night. And as I dove toward the pavement, I saw the truth. She wasn't saving me. She was pointing the weapon at someone standing directly behind me, and the person standing there was holding a badge that looked exactly like the ones I had seen in the news, identifying them as official law enforcement. I had just been saved by a criminal, or perhaps I had just been caught in the middle of a war between two sides of the same coin. The blast deafened me, a ringing sensation spiraling through my skull as I pressed my face into the cold, oil-stained concrete of the alleyway. I looked up, blinking through the stinging grit, and saw the man with the badge stumble backward, clutching his shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was down. The woman stood over me, her stance wide and professional, her eyes darting between the wounded man and the dark, looming fire escape where his partners were surely descending. "Get in," she hissed, grabbing my collar and hauling me upright with a strength that belied her slender frame. I scrambled into the passenger seat of the sedan, the smell of burnt cordite and ozone clinging to the upholstery. She slammed the car into gear, and we fishtailed out of the alleyway, tires screeching against the wet pavement. I looked back through the rear window, my chest heaving, to see more figures emerging from the shadows, men in dark tactical gear, swarming the spot where I had stood only seconds ago. They weren't just searching for me, they were closing the city down. "Who are you?" I managed to gasp, my hands trembling as I clutched the briefcase to my chest. "How did you know where I was? And why did you shoot at them? They're supposed to be the law." The woman didn't look at me. Her gaze was locked on the rearview mirror, her hands steady on the wheel as she navigated the labyrinthine backstreets of the city at a breakneck pace. "The law is a subjective term in a city like this," she replied, her voice taut. "Those people back there? They aren't internal security. They're a splinter group, a shadow unit that hasn't officially existed for 5 years. They use the badge to gain access, and they use the threat of a massive criminal case to ensure their targets never open their mouths. You aren't being hunted by the government, you're being hunted by a group trying to steal the secrets that the government is too afraid to acknowledge." "And you?" I countered, my voice rising in panic. "What do you want with me, with this?" I tapped the briefcase. She finally glanced at me, and for a fleeting moment, her mask of cold professionalism slipped. I saw fear, real, raw, human fear. I'm the one who leaked the data to the man you met in the elevator. He was my partner. He was supposed to bring that case to a journalist, not a civilian who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you think I'm here to hurt you, you're wrong. I'm the only reason you're still breathing. We drifted around a sharp corner, the tires protesting, and sped toward the industrial district. The city lights began to thin out, replaced by the towering skeletal silhouettes of cranes and cargo ships. We were heading to the docks, the very place I had tried to escape tonight. But as we reached the perimeter of the shipyard, the woman slammed on the brakes. The road ahead was blocked by a wall of heavy vehicles, their emergency lights flashing in a hypnotic, rhythmic pulse of red and blue. "They're faster than I thought," she whispered, a bead of sweat tracing a line down her temple. She turned the car down a narrow service road, intending to bypass the blockade, but a massive steel barrier slid shut in front of us, blocking our path. She cursed under her breath and spun the steering wheel, turning into a rusted warehouse gate. We smashed through the chain-link fence, the metal screeching and tearing like a dying beast, and pulled into the dark, cavernous space. "Stay down," she ordered, killing the headlights. Total darkness swallowed us. I sat there, heart hammering, listening to the sound of heavy engines approaching outside. Dozens of them. They weren't just coming, they were hunting. She grabbed her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, then tossed it to me. "The code is 0922. Open the tablet. If you see the transmission button, wait for my signal. If you don't send that data to the public news server in 60 seconds, we are both as good as ghosts." I fumbled with the tablet, the blue light of the screen illuminating my terrified face. I typed in the code. The interface opened, revealing a single blinking red icon. Upload, transmit. But there was a submenu I hadn't seen before. It listed a series of names, and at the very top of the list, in bold, stark lettering, was my own name. Next to it was a document dated for tomorrow morning. Target liquidation, final report. I froze. I wasn't just a bystander. I was part of their files. "They have a report on me," I whispered, the words dying in my throat. "They've been planning this for weeks." The woman turned to me, her face pale in the light of the tablet. "They haven't been planning to kill you for weeks, kid. They've been planning to use you as the fall guy for the entire organized scheme. If that data goes live, your fingerprints will be on it. You will be the face of the crime. But if we don't send it, you'll never live long enough to argue your innocence." Outside, the screech of tires died down, replaced by the heavy, measured footsteps of dozens of people approaching the warehouse. A spotlight hit the corrugated metal walls, turning the building into a cage. She reached for her bag, pulling out a small metallic object, but just as she turned to face the door, a laser sight swept across the interior, landing squarely on her chest. Before she could react, a muffled shot rang out from the rafters above, and she slumped forward, pinning my hand against the dashboard. I looked up at the rafters, and there, silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the skylight, stood a figure, one I recognized from the security cameras in my own building. It was the man from the elevator, the one who had given me the bag, and he wasn't looking at the woman. He was looking directly at me, a cold, predatory smirk playing on his lips as he raised his weapon toward my head. My heart stopped. Or perhaps it simply forgot how to beat. The man from the elevator, the man who looked like he was shivering in terror just hours ago, now stood perfectly still on the iron catwalk, his posture as rigid and lethal as a soldier's. The fear I had seen in his eyes was nothing more than a masterclass in deception. He had played the part of the desperate victim to perfection, using me as a human shield and a courier to transport his illicit findings through the building's security perimeter. I was never a witness to be avoided. I was the disposable asset to be sacrificed. The woman beside me, slumped over the console, let out a ragged, shallow breath. She wasn't dead, but she was fading fast. Blood pooled on the dashboard near my shaking hand, which still clutched the glowing tablet. The man on the catwalk descended the ladder with slow, rhythmic steps, his weapon never wavering from its target. Behind him, the warehouse doors groaned as they were kicked wide, and the silhouettes of a dozen more men filled the frame, their weapons leveled at the car. "You really were a convenient choice," the man called out, his voice echoing through the hollow, cavernous space. "Quiet, isolated, a history that makes you the perfect candidate for a deep-cover failure. We needed someone to hold the hardware through the checkpoint, and you, with your boxes and your new life, were simply too perfect to ignore. It's almost a shame to end such a promising narrative." He reached the ground and began to walk toward us, his boots clicking against the concrete like a countdown. I looked down at the tablet. The transmit button was still blinking, a tiny, pulsing red heart of data that could destroy them all. If I pressed it, the information would hit the public servers, stripping away their cover and exposing the entire organized scheme. But the moment I sent it, the GPS tracker embedded in the hardware would alert them to my exact position, and they were already here. "Don't," the woman whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound. She gripped my arm with surprising, desperate strength, her nails digging into my skin. "If you press it, the signal will broadcast our location to the entire city. They'll have no choice but to terminate us on the spot to stop the upload. Close the app. Hand it over. Maybe you can survive." "Survive?" I laughed, a bitter, hysterical sound that seemed to surprise even me. "There is no surviving this, is there? I'm already the face of the crime. My name is on the report. Whether I hand it over or not, I'm the one they're pinning this on." The man was 10 feet away now. He stopped, his expression one of mild, clinical curiosity. He raised his hand, gesturing for his men to hold their fire. "He's smart," he remarked to the empty air. "A pity, really. But you're right, kid. The report is already written. All that's left is to find the suspect in possession of the evidence. It's an open and shut case. You'll spend dozens of years in a facility where the light never reaches, blamed for every illegal transaction this unit has ever authorized." He held out a gloved hand, palm up. "The tablet. Now. Don't make this messy." My fingers hovered over the screen. I could feel the heat radiating from the device. I looked at the woman, then at the man, and finally I looked past them, toward the heavy, rusted rollers of the back shipping door. It was partially open, and through the gap I could see the shimmering black surface of the harbor. The tide was high. "You think you've won," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You think you've planned every variable, every movement, every new chapter of my life. But you forgot one thing. I didn't care about my old life, and I don't care about my life now. I have nothing left to lose." "Everyone has something to lose," he sneered, taking another step closer. "Don't be a martyr for a system that doesn't care if you live or die." "Maybe," I whispered. I leaned back, my hand dropping below the dash. I wasn't reaching for the transmit button. I was reaching for the emergency release lever of the car's transmission. The woman saw what I was doing, and her eyes widened in horror. "What are you—" "I'm choosing the next chapter," I snarled. I kicked the floorboard, slamming the car into reverse. The engine roared to life, a guttural, mechanical scream that filled the warehouse. I didn't look at the man. I looked at the wall. I floored it. The car jumped backward, tearing through the warehouse floor with the force of a battering ram. The man dived out of the way, shouting orders to fire, but it was too late. We smashed through the rear wall, the corrugated metal crumpling like tissue paper, and plunged out into the freezing midnight air. For a second, there was weightlessness, a breathtaking, terrifying suspension of reality. The ocean rose up to meet us, a dark, churning abyss. As the car hit the water, the pressure shattered the windshield, and the icy Atlantic rushed in, cold enough to stop my heart. I grabbed the tablet, sealed it in the waterproof bag I'd had in my pocket, and kicked the door open. As the car began its descent into the black, I looked back one last time. Standing on the jagged, broken edge of the dock, illuminated by the flashing lights of the arriving patrol cars, the man was watching the water, his face twisted in a mask of absolute, unbridled rage. And then, a sound came from the depths, not the car settling on the floor, but something else. A mechanical pinging, rhythmic and persistent, coming from the bag in my hand. The tablet wasn't just sending data, it was receiving a response, and the screen lit up with a single, chilling instruction. Initiate Protocol 0. The frigid water roared into my lungs, a liquid shock that burned like fire. I fought the urge to inhale, my limbs thrashing against the oppressive weight of the freezing depths. The car was sinking rapidly, a metal coffin retreating into the silt of the harbor floor, but I had already kicked myself free. I pushed toward the surface, the glowing blue light from the waterproof bag clutched in my hand, acting as my only compass. I broke the surface, gasping, my chest heaving as I paddled toward the rotting pylons of a pier hidden beneath the shadows of the shipping cranes. I hauled myself onto the barnacle-crusted wood, shivering violently. My clothes were soaked, my skin turning a translucent blue, but I didn't stop. I crawled into the darkness beneath the pier, opening the waterproof bag. The tablet was still alive, the screen displaying a map of the harbor and a countdown. 0:45. Protocol 0. I didn't know what it meant, but the urgency in the text was visceral. I tapped the screen. A video window popped up. It was a live stream of the warehouse I had just escaped. The man from the elevator was there, frantically barking orders into his radio, his men scouring the broken wall where the car had vanished. He looked up, his gaze fixing on something in the distance. He wasn't looking at the water anymore. He was looking at his own men. Suddenly, the warehouse erupted, not from the outside, but from within. A series of controlled, rhythmic detonations tore through the facility, leveling the entire structure in a cascade of fire and twisted steel. The shockwave hit me even from across the water, a low thrum that vibrated in my marrow. The screen flashed a final message. Evidence archived. Cloud synchronization complete. All implicated parties flagged for immediate internal review by the agency. You are cleared. I stared at the screen, the weight of the last 24 hours collapsing onto my shoulders. The man, the suit, the heavy accusations. It was all gone, erased by the very machine they had built to control the narrative. I looked up to see sirens approaching, but they weren't the ones from earlier. These were official, unmarked black SUVs that converged on the pier with surgical precision. Men in dark tactical gear, but not the men from before, swarmed the area. They didn't search for me. They moved with a purpose that suggested they knew exactly where I was. One of them, a woman in a sharp gray coat, stepped out of the lead vehicle. She held a badge, not the fake one I'd seen, but one that radiated a terrifying, undeniable authority. She walked to the edge of the pier and looked down at me, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer a hand, she simply waited. "You've caused quite a lot of noise tonight," she said, her voice cool and clinical. "I didn't have a choice," I replied, my voice raspy. I held up the tablet. "They were going to frame me. They had the reports, the files, everything." "We know," she said, nodding toward the ruins of the warehouse across the bay. The files were corrupted, but the truth was successfully transmitted. The group that was operating out of that facility has been dismantled. You were never a target. You were the necessary variable to bring them into the light. Their arrogance was their undoing. They thought they could operate in the shadows of the law, using people like you as pawns. They didn't account for the fact that a pawn can reach the other side of the board. I stood up, my legs trembling, and handed her the tablet. She took it, sliding it into a shielded case. "What happens to me?" I asked, looking out at the dark, turbulent water. "I have no home, no job, no future. I'm a ghost." She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time, a small, tired smile touched her lips. "You wanted to start a new chapter, didn't you? Somewhere quiet? Somewhere no one knows your name?" I nodded slowly. "Then go," she said, gesturing toward a sleek, unmarked sedan parked at the end of the pier. "The train you were supposed to take left an hour ago, but there's a private transport waiting at the station. It will take you to that coastal town. Your rent is paid, your identity is secure, and as far as the world, and those people, are concerned, you died in that car in the harbor. You are officially erased. My advice? Don't look back. I looked at the car, then back at the water. The harbor was calm again, the only trace of the night being the distant flicker of emergency lights and the smell of salt water. I had been a pawn, a courier, and a scapegoat, but in the end, I had become the architect of my own liberation. I walked toward the car, my steps lighter than they had been in years. I didn't know what kind of life awaited me on the coast, but as I climbed into the back seat and watched the city skyline fade into the morning fog, I realized I finally had the one thing I'd been chasing all along: a blank page. The story of the man who almost lost his life to a lie was over. The story of the man who finally became free was just beginning. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the engine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of the dawn.